2 years after they threw her out, Lyra Ashford knocked on the front door of her father's house. She wasn't there to visit. She wasn't there to forgive. She was there because her name was on the deed. But to understand how that happened, you need to know about the broken television, the one they threw at her feet on the way out, the one nobody wanted, the one that made her richer than all of them combined. Lyra's childhood wasn't extravagant, but it was whole. Her father, Stellan Ashford, was an importer by trade, modest, careful with money, the kind of man who kept records in handwritten ledgers and never bought anything he couldn't pay for outright. He wasn't a man of many words, but he was consistent. Dinner at 7, Sundays reserved. When Lyra was sick, he sat outside her door and read aloud until she fell asleep. That consistency was everything to her. He remarried when Lyra was 12. Vivienne was elegant, soft-spoken at first, and Lyra had tried to make room for her. Children adapt. They want to believe in the version of things being presented to them. For a while, it seemed to work. But Stellan was the gravity that held the household together. Without him, nothing stayed in orbit. He had a heart attack at 56. No warning. He was at his desk reviewing invoices when it happened. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was already over. The funeral was small. Stellan had kept a quiet life, and his circle reflected that. Lyra stood at the graveside and felt the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself loudly. It just settles into you like cold water, slow and total. She cried on the drive home. She didn't cry after that. There wasn't time. Vivienne cried at the service, briefly, precisely the right amount. Cassia, Vivienne's daughter from her first marriage, stood slightly apart from everyone with her arms crossed, scanning the attendees with a look that had nothing to do with grief. Lyra noticed. She said nothing. The night after the burial, Vivienne sat across from Lyra at the kitchen table. Her tone was measured, almost kind. "You're 19, she said. "Old enough to understand that things have to change now. Stellan carried a lot. Now that weight gets redistributed. I expect you to contribute to this household." It didn't sound like a conversation. It sounded like an announcement. Within 2 weeks, the shape of Lyra's life had been completely redrawn. She cooked. She cleaned. She handled laundry, groceries, dishes, while Vivienne managed the finances and Cassia did nothing. When Lyra once left Cassia's laundry unfolded on her bed, Cassia brought it downstairs and dropped it on the kitchen floor without a word. "I'm not your housekeeper," Lyra said quietly. Cassia considered this. "Then what exactly are you?" she said, and walked back upstairs. Vivienne, when Lyra brought it to her, didn't look up from her magazine. "Cassia is my daughter. You're Stellan's. Stellan isn't here anymore." The sentence was delivered without heat. That was what made it so final. 3 months in, they moved her out of her bedroom. "We need the space," Vivienne said. No further explanation. Lyra was given the storage room at the back of the house, a narrow space with a single overhead bulb and a window facing the neighbor's fence. She kept her father's television in the corner. It was old, a boxy, outdated set he'd owned since before she was born, kept in his study for reasons he never explained. She hadn't been able to leave it behind. Food became unpredictable. She cooked full dinners and was told she could eat later. Later meant cold scraps or nothing. She started keeping crackers under her mattress. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. 8 months after Stellan's death, Lyra was running close to empty. She'd had 4 hours of sleep. Up since 5, floors, breakfast, beds, then starting dinner before noon because Vivienne had mentioned guests. She was at the sink when the glass slipped. It hit the tile and shattered. Vivienne appeared in the doorway. She looked at the broken glass, then at Lyra, and something in her expression shifted. Not anger, more like conclusion, like she'd been holding a decision in reserve and had just decided to spend it. "Get out," she said. "What?" "I want you out of this house. Tonight." This was Stellan's house. Stellan is gone. The house is mine. You are not my responsibility, and you never were. A pause. You have 30 minutes. Lyra packed what fit in one bag. Clothes, documents, less than $300 in cash. She walked out the front door into a November night. Sharp air, wet pavement. She stood on the step and tried to think of a single person to call. She couldn't. Then, a heavy thud behind her. Her father's television dropped from the doorway into the grass. Vivienne's voice came through the gap before the door closed. Take that eyesore with you. It was his. It's yours. Worthless, the pair of you. The lock turned. Lyra stood in the dark looking at the television. It was bulky and impractical. Every sensible thought told her to leave it. She picked it up anyway, tucked it under one arm, bag over the other shoulder, and started walking. The first 2 nights, she slept in a 24-hour laundromat. After that, a church shelter. Clean, safe, strict about curfew. She tried to sell the television twice. One shop owner told her it wasn't worth his floor space. Another offered $10. She almost took it. Something stopped her, and she couldn't say what. She found work at a diner 2 streets from the shelter. Cash in hand, 6 days a week. The pay was poor and the work was hard, and she was grateful for every hour of it. She kept the television under her cot and told herself she'd figure out what to do with it later. Some nights, she lay in her cot and tried to locate something inside herself that felt like forward momentum. Most nights, she couldn't find it. She got up anyway. 3 weeks in, the television stopped turning on entirely. There was a repair shop 2 blocks east, the kind of place that had been there so long it had become invisible to the street around it. Hand-lettered signs in the window, components sorted into labeled coffee cans, the smell of solder and machine oil. The owner's name was Oleander, late 60s, unhurried, with the stillness of someone who had spent decades working with small, precise things. His regulars called him Ole. Lyra brought the television in on a Tuesday and asked if he could look at it. He opened the rear panel, worked through the checks methodically, and then stopped. He didn't say anything. He just stopped moving. Then he reached in carefully and began feeling along the inner frame. Not the components, the frame itself, running his fingers along the edges with a deliberateness that made Lyra straighten. "Come here," he said. He had his hand on a section of the rear housing, a panel within the panel, flush with the frame, invisible unless you knew to look. He pressed 2 points simultaneously and it released. Behind it were 2 small cloth pouches tucked into a carved cavity in the frame. He opened the first one and tipped the contents onto a square of felt. Rough stones, uncut, irregular, ranging from the size of a fingernail to the size of a thumbnail. "Those are diamonds," Oleander said, quietly, factually. He opened the second pouch. More stones. "Your father built this compartment himself. Clean work. He knew what he was doing." He paused. He was an importer. He likely acquired these through legitimate private trade, holding them as a store of value. Either way, they're real, they're yours, and they're worth significant money. Lyra sat down on the stool beside the bench. She thought about her father at his desk, his handwritten ledgers, the television sitting untouched in his study for 30 years. Something left for her that he'd never had the chance to give. "How do I sell them legally?" she said. "I want to do it right." "I know a gemologist," Oleander said. "Legitimate, thorough, fair. I'll call her today if you want." "Yes," Lyra said. "Please." The appraisal took 3 days. The total wasn't a lottery number. Something quieter and more useful. Enough to build from. Enough to move deliberately without attracting the wrong attention. Lyra was careful. She signed a proper lease on a small apartment, opened a bank account, bought a second-hand laptop, and spent her evenings reading business structures, import regulations, contracts, accounting basics. She kept working at the diner for 4 more months. Not because she had to, because the steadiness of it kept her grounded while everything else shifted. She enrolled in a part-time business program at the community college. Through Oleander, she was introduced to a small network of importers and independent traders. She started small, modest margins, careful selection, no overreach. She made mistakes and learned from each one without flinching. By the end of the second year, she had a functioning business, a stable income, and a reputation for delivering what she promised. She thought about the house often, not with grief or anger, with patient arithmetic. She hired a property lawyer named Petra to run a title search on the Ashford house. After Stellan's death, Vivienne had taken out 2 loans against the property and gradually stopped servicing them. The mortgage was in serious arrears. The lender had sent notices. Vivienne had not responded. "Can I make an offer to the lender directly?" Lyra asked. "Yes. Clean title transfer, entirely legitimate." "Do it." The offer was accepted within 10 days. Lyra received the title documents on a Thursday morning and sat with them at her kitchen table for a long time before she put them away. She did not contact Vivienne. She drove herself. No announcement. She parked at the curb and sat for a moment looking at the house. It looked smaller than she remembered, or perhaps she was just larger. She knocked. Vivienne answered. The sequence of expressions that crossed her face in the first 3 seconds was almost clinical. Confusion, recognition, then a rapid recalibration into something trying hard to resemble warmth. "Lyra." "I'm not here to talk," Lyra said. "I'm here because the title on this property transferred to my name 4 days ago. I have the documentation." She held out the envelope. Vivienne didn't take it. Cassia appeared in the hallway behind her, looking at Lyra the way you look at something you're trying to place. "I'm giving you 7 days," Lyra said. "After that, I'll need the property vacant." Vivienne's composure broke. "You cannot do this. This is our home. We have nowhere." "You told me this house was yours," Lyra said. "The night you put me out in the rain. You were very clear about it." She paused. "I believed you. I just went and bought it." She set the envelope on the table just inside the door. 7 days, she said, and walked back down the path. She sat in the car for a while before starting the engine. She didn't feel the way she'd imagined. No surge of satisfaction. What she felt was closer to completion, like a sentence left unfinished for years had finally been given its full stop. She thought about her father. The television in his study, never explained, never drawn attention to. Whether he'd known she would need it, whether it had been deliberate, a quiet insurance policy for a daughter he'd sensed was less protected than she should have been. She would never know. That was something she'd made peace with. She started the engine and pulled away without looking back. The house disappeared behind a turn. She drove home. The girl they made invisible became the woman they couldn't ignore. And the thing they threw out the door, that was the key to everything.